Welcome to Habitual Excellence, presented by Value Capture. This podcast and our firm is all about helping you and your organization achieve habitual excellence via one unifying focus, one value-based structure, and one performance system. In other words, it's about helping you capture dramatically more value through achieving perfect care and perfect safety for patients and staff. To learn more about Value Capture and our services, visit www.valuecapturellc.com.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Habitual Excellence. I'm Ken Segel. I'm the CEO of Value Capture and host of the podcast. I'm excited for this episode because we have a distinguished and a repeat guest today. He is Cooper Linton. Cooper is the Associate Vice President and Chief Retention Officer for Duke Health, their home care and hospice division, which he leads. Cooper, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. I hope we have every employee here as our Chief Retention Officer. We share that title all throughout the organization.
I want to hear about that in a minute for sure, a little bit more about that. And I think some of the results you're getting will help us understand why you hold that title and others are emulating it as well. I said welcome to the podcast, but I should say welcome back to the podcast. And I think today we wanted to have you back because for a number of reasons. One, you and your team really are fully committed to a habitual excellence journey and building a world-class operating system to get the results you felt your community, your patients, your team deserved. And you have created better and better win-win-win results over time. When we had you on and originally in about 2021, it was pretty exciting what you were starting to put together. And when we checked in with you next, you were achieving some retention numbers that coming out of COVID that were absolutely astounding. And things have gotten better on the people and the results front since. And that's enough reason to have you on. But I think another reason is we always appreciate how much you think about the learnings for yourself as a leader. And we've gotten a lot of feedback that other leaders find that, to be very helpful to hear and listen to and benefit from your humility, but sort of insight. And some of that comes because you're actually quite great with a story, which the audience, if they haven't heard the previous ones, is about to discover, is my bet. So, so we're really pleased to have you.
It's great to be back, and I appreciate you having me back.
All right. So today we're going to get into, actually, it's interesting. We're going to catch people up on the results. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to remind people of the work that's led to those results so they know, what led to the outcomes. And the latest learnings, which I think are really interesting. And then we're going to talk about why, if this sort of enduring habitual excellence approach produces such great, real, sustainable results over time, why it's the one so rarely chosen versus shorter term attempts that are generally frustrating for leaders. So we want to sort of get into that territory and see what we can learn and invite people who listen to the podcast to join us with their thoughts. So with that as predicate, we're going to turn this over to you. And, will you bring us up fresh on the results your team is achieving and some of the work that's led to it?
Well, thanks, Ken. I think the last time we met to look at some results, our results had been done in kind of a model cell, if you will, which had been our home health program. And Janet Burgess, for some of y'all who know her in the industry, have also heard her at Catalysis. She's, in my mind, an absolute rock star of home health, but she knows the business, but she's deeply committed to her people. One of the things we were struggling with as an organization, not unlike the larger industry, is our turnover is too high. And we lose this institutional knowledge, we lose the experience, we lose our ability to handle increasingly complex patients because we don't get to build upon the experience of our staff. We keep turning them over, or as I say, we keep training great people to go work at our competitors. And so how do we quit acting as the the proving ground for our competitors and start really keeping great talent. And so we got focused in home health where we had very high turnover. We had over 70% RN turnover annualized and got that number down to below 20 in a hurry. And then from that model cell concept, we said we've got to expand this. So we took it into hospice and we took it into home infusion and the larger entity and began to see significant improvements in that. But we didn't want to limit it just to nursing. I mean, everybody here is valuable, and people say, well, different jobs are valued differently. Find the least valued financially person in your organization, let them not show up for a week and reconsider their value. I mean, it changes your mind, right? When the trash cans start overflowing or the grass isn't cut or something like that, you suddenly revalue that person. We want everybody sticking around. Everybody here is part of the same mission. And so we took that model cell, took it out to our larger entity, and I'll be happy to share some of those retention results because it's now taken a while for that to happen. There's no light switch, it's implement this and 30 days later, presto bingo, you have everything's great. So I'll try and do a quick share,
Yeah,
but
please do.
I'll lay the groundwork for this. We also just did what we call culture pulse here at Duke, which is really this employee survey, right? It's where we survey our staff to say, how do you feel about it? And because we've used the same tool now for a number of years, though we used an abbreviated version during COVID because nobody had the bandwidth to fill out a long survey. That just wasn't sensitive to what healthcare folks were going through at the time. But you can see that we've now used the same instrument 5 times. And it's interesting to see how that data lines up. Let me see if I can manage to share. It's always when there's a guy from public school like me, I'm doing the best I can here. So here's what we saw in our culture pulse. And I just the highlighted area, the circled area on the right is the most recent survey data. And you can go all the way back to 2017. You can see during the COVID and immediately post-COVID era, our survey results declined. And in 2020, we really did we asked for a very abbreviated survey. But you can see that in this oval on the right-hand side, almost everything went up. And the one that went down is a bit of an anomaly to me, since people's sense of belonging went up, their sense of teamwork went up, their sense of empowerment went up. So I'm a little baffled by the one that went down, but I'll take one out of that whole green list.
Yeah.
But I don't want us to forget why we're focused. We still need to look and understand that better. I was really happy that over 80% of our staff responded to this. Disengagement to me is one of the most scary things. If people are unhappy and telling you at least there's engagement, I get really nervous when there's a lack of engagement. And we had better than 4 in 5 of our staff members fill this out. It gives us confidence in the data. But when we start drilling into this, it's easy to look at this and go, okay, great, we're in the good. And overall, that's probably true. But when we dig into spots, we find that everybody doesn't have the same experience. And so we have to maintain vigilance.
Yeah.
We need to look at an area that has 5 employees the same way we looked at the entire entity 3 years ago. We just can't back up. And so when you say, well, how does that relate to overall turnover? So this was from July of 23 through May of 24. And that's the overall staff turnover. As you can see, it was higher during COVID, the great resignation, as many people called it. But we're actually down, and our turbulence is even below where we started pre-COVID. And in our industry, this is actually pretty remarkable. 30+% turnover is not unusual. And then in certain categories, 50 and 60%. And that's absolutely industry destroying, those kind of numbers.
Right.
But if you look to the left, we had numbers in that category not long ago.
Right.
And it was really damaging us. Damaging our culture, damaging our clinical outcomes. And so not surprisingly with this, our clinical outcomes have improved as well. If we flip over and take a look at nursing And I will say that it's not always apples to apples. If you're working in lower acuity home-based care, sometimes these numbers are lower. For those that are not familiar with this, Duke University, who we get the majority of our volumes from, is the highest acuity hospital in the state of North Carolina. So this is a very high acuity home health, hospice, and home infusion program, incredibly short lengths of stay in hospice. And so what we've seen here is a greater reduction or significant reduction in turnover, terminations, and a lot of that came as we spread that model cell into hospice and home infusion and said, okay, we had some wins in home health, but we can't let there only be one place that's a great place to work. We've got to make sense out of this elsewhere. So our hospice numbers improved dramatically, and our home infusion numbers have improved dramatically, both in high turnover roles like pharmacy techs, but also among nurses and aides and social workers and those sorts of things. So,
Cooper, yeah,
yes,
go ahead.
it looked like you had a thought, and I'm always interested in yours.
Well, a thought that'll lead to a question. Just really on the, could you describe the work? You've used the word model cell, and those familiar with process excellence, et cetera, will recognize that. But what did you guys actually do, just described at a high level to really change the course of those curves? How did you create a great operating system?
So the model cell that started, I think that was in home health. It was one of the hardest things for us because we thought we understood the problem. And we jumped from, okay, we understand the problem, which we didn't. And because we didn't understand the problem, we immediately made some assumptions about the solution, which were, by the way, pretty much all wrong. Yeah. And that's a painful lesson. But we brought our frontline staff in and we began to map the work out.
Yeah.
Because they kept saying, well, we're overworked. And everybody's working crazy in this industry. We understand it. But when we began to truly map the workflows, literally going down the walls, I'm pointing at a wall, it wasn't this one, it was another one, much bigger. This wall wouldn't have held it. We mapped the workflow that our staff was being asked to complete just to admit a patient and treat them. And it was ridiculous. Yep. And once we began to understand how hard we had made doing the work. The work's hard in and to itself, but we shouldn't make doing it hard. We had made this really hard. Mm-hmm. And there's a moment of self-reflection in yourself as a leader where you go, man, this does not feel good. And we've subjected people to this. And we had our frontline staff involved in this, clearly guiding us through it, because honestly, I didn't understand the workflow. I thought I did, but I didn't. I was wrong. Yeah. I found out I was wrong a lot, by the way. It's turned into a trend. And so we took that and began to reinvest into changing the work for home health. Then we did the same sorts of things in home infusion and in hospice, but the work was really different because the work between home infusion and home-based care and hospice and running an inpatient hospice facility don't have that much in common. So we began to understand what their pain points were. And it ultimately comes down to culture. If we can create a culture, then we build capacity. If we are able to build that capacity, then we can deliver quality. And it's in that order. Because our culture was such that we were ignoring the pain of our frontline staff and we were turning them over. We never built capacity, and without capacity, we never had quality. And so it really followed that cadence.
And that really changed how you guys led every day. You changed your management system to be much more in touch with the actual flow of work of the people who are providing value for patients.
Well, working with you guys right at the beginning of COVID had put in, we started the huddles, but we also then worked with Mike Radke, also on your team, who walked us through some deeper dives into how to handle rapid cycle improvement, how to run sprints, how to change the way we thought about holding ourselves accountable to making progress. And what we found is that in spite of being wrong a lot of times, if our staff see us authentically trying to move forward, Even if we experiment and fail, and they believe in what we're trying to do, they're part of it, they'll forgive the failure as long as they believe we're moving forward and that we're going to execute change on their behalf. And so their grace has allowed us over the last several years to make the kind of improvements that bring numbers from 70% turnover down to under 20%, or as an organization have a 13% and change turnover rate. They've stuck with us. In fact, we just did our career service awards where we recognize people at key milestones. We did that yesterday here. And we've never had more people at the 5-year milestone than this year. It was actually a fairly long career service award ceremony. It was great. It's supposed to be long if we do it right.
They're making the chief retention officer look good. That's great.
Well, they're all doing. I mean, every member of the leadership team, this idea that they're going to bring in one guy to do this or one lady to do this is a lost cause.
Yeah.
The model, the process that we've adopted and through our work with you guys is an all in. In fact, everybody takes turns running our senior huddles because everybody knows how, and it's part of our organizational resilience.
And you started to share some of those core lessons that you've had with us, and that it's not just the leader. The leader is the catalyst, but everybody's got to buy in. And you're really eloquent about that. Do you want to expand on that and maybe share some of the other lessons that have deepened for you in these last many months as you accelerate the work?
So there's this, we've learned a number of them. One is that we have to walk in the door as humble learners. I mean, I've been working in home-based care for a long time, but it's not the same industry I went to work in. In fact, it has very little resemblance to the one I work in today. We're always having to learn, but if we can walk in as people who are trying to learn what our staff are experiencing as opposed to tell them how to do it better, then they are so responsive to our efforts to help them, because they genuinely believe that we're there to help them succeed. I want to point out this, one of the numbers we put up there from the Culture Pulse was around safety. Safety in our industry is terrible. And nobody wants to talk about it. I want to call it the way it is. It's flipping atrocious. And I get it. We're going into uncontrolled environments. I totally understand.
Yeah.
Get it. But we still have an obligation to the people going in. And if you're not safe in the delivery of the care, there's no way you can deliver safe care. I mean, there's an order of the operation. So we got very focused on safety issues.
Right.
Very focused. Like it is part of the first 30 minutes of orientation for all employees when they first come to work here. We put in some additional technologies to support them. But fundamentally, we said we will trust your judgment, and you can remove yourself from any situation at any time, under any circumstance that you don't believe you're safe, and you will never be Monday morning quarterbacked or second guessed. And when we start off orientation that way, people's eyes won't fit in their head. They've not heard this before. And so while our industry has a terrible safety record, we have a great one. Yeah. Because our people know when there's something unsafe, I'm fully supported in leaving this environment. We will figure out a way to deliver safe care if it's at all possible. But our people aren't sacrificial, and they heard that. And even our safety scores beat the health systems. If you look at it across the industry, ours should be terrible. But it's our staff have bought into it. Our leaders have bought into it. Our visiting employees have bought into it. We had the executive vice president from the health system come to the front door one day, and his badge didn't say HomeCare and Hospice on it. And he couldn't get in. And he buzzed in, and the receptionist asked him who he was, and he told us. And he came in. She said, "I'm going to need you to sign in. That's our standard process." And he said, "Well, I'm the executive vice president." She said, "That's great. You can write that next to your name when you sign in." That's no offense, but if your badge doesn't open that door, you sign in. And so it's the safety. And he was very gracious about it, just to be clear.
I love how you use the term order of operation, and you all really did leverage the power of safety as kind of a precondition to get started and begin to produce that belief and tie everything together. And it's great to hear how that's become fundamental to the culture, and not surprising. Usually places that have sort of results being tied together like this have safety as that kind of anchor.
It was funny is that was a new concept to me when you guys introduced it, actually. And I didn't initially buy in. Okay.
Right.
And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but when I first heard
Yeah.
this, I was like, this is not where I'd start, I don't think. And I remember you telling a story about Alcoa and the challenges that they had and the safety issues, and they got behind that. I realized, well, there actually is a corollary there between, we don't make aluminum, but
Yeah.
the safety issues, particularly in home-based care.
Yeah.
And it made me step back. I was like, well, genuinely, who here is not supportive of safety?
Right.
I mean, if you're not in agreement that we don't want to hurt anybody and we're going to follow all the rules, if you can't get behind that, you probably shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And
And I love, yeah. And how you talked about people's eyes light up when they realize you kind of mean it, which was great. So great to hear. You've used, you've said this work is kind of different, that it's not hey, 1995 in a few months and your problem's fixed. It has a different kind of rhythm and logic to it. Can you sort of expound on some of those learnings and how you think of it now?
yeah, I'd be happy to, but I will tell you, I feel sometimes a little bit at conflict with what I feel like people want.
Mhm.
And I'll say people, I count myself in there. I want there to be an easy solution. And what I found is that we started with safety, and safety allowed us to look at how do we respect people's time, and respecting people's time caused us to look into the depth of the work. Understanding the work made us realize how many opportunities for error. In fact, it was remarkable that anything went right. I mean, it was sometimes you look at a mapped out process, you go, how in the world did anything go right? And it was because everybody was working frantically to correct the errors in the process. And they went home exhausted, but because the process never improved, they had to come back tomorrow and be heroic again. And then we call that burnout, like somehow or another, they just lacked the necessary resilience. When in reality, we abused the psychic health of these people for years until they decided that for their own self-preservation, they'd leave, which is awful. It's a terrible indictment. But we worked on that, and then that allowed us to get retention, and retention allowed us to build clinical excellence and experience over time, and that caused more people to want to come here. And then we were able to accept more patients, which improved our financial health, and it becomes this cycle of improvement that continues, but it doesn't happen in 30, 60, or 90 days. It's not a give me your 6-month plan. And
Yeah.
that's the hard part, is that, I mean, if you look at this, this is over a span of 4.5 years, 5 years,
Right.
actually.
Yeah.
It's 5 years to get to this point. And most of us don't want that. I don't want to go to the gym and eat right for 4 years. I want to take Wegovy, and I'm not on it, as you can tell. But we want these kind of rapid solutions. If we hire this person,
Yeah.
they will come in and change the culture, as opposed to we've got a group of leaders that have got to sit down and evaluate our effectiveness and deal with our own painful truths and decide if we're going to lead differently.
Yeah. Well, let's continue to go there. And by the way, I love how you sort of describe quite physically and logically together the sort of virtuous cycle that starts to build of results piling on top of results, and sort of all the dimensions that matter because they're tied together: the people, the process, the outcomes, the patient satisfaction. And I know you've talked about it before as, the batch of results that you get that are the glimmer of tying it together after 6 months become the down payment for the next level, and they're the down payment for the next level and the next level. And pretty soon you look back in 4 years, here you are. You described, we're going to get to the learnings of why, we don't want to go to the gym and things like that, and try to think a little bit more critically as leaders in a minute. Cooper, talk a little bit about the work not being glamorous. It doesn't have a lot of sizzle.
Oh, it's pretty anti-social. No, I mean, if you think about it, it is it's the honorable mundane. Okay.
Yeah.
It's getting the little things right. Like, did we handle someone coming through the front door correctly? So, well, how big a deal is it? Well, depends on who it was coming through the front door. Uh, some mistakes were small, some are big, but there's a grind to it. The cadence of our work is built around hubs. We start with the most important thing, like a lot of organizations do with frontline. But we often, as organizations, think that as leaders, we're here to solve the problems. What we have found over time is that when tier 1 runs correctly with our frontline staff, run tier 2, which is our frontline managers, when that's run correctly, 95% or better of everything that needs to be solved is solved there. But we do it the same way every day. And there's nothing new and exciting about it. In fact, there's a little bit of a grind at times. But what we have found is that there's a cadence. We run it the same way every time. We understand our business better. In fact, we used to run director meetings or leadership meetings, whatever you want to call them. Different places call them different things. Executive team meetings, whatever. What we found is when we ran tier 1, 2, and 3 correctly, we eliminated 80% of what we needed to meet on as a leadership team because it was being dealt with in real time.
Right.
And then we decided to follow a very similar cadence for our executive team meetings and break those into 15 minutes meetings held a couple times a week, up to 3 times a week, though very often, today's lasted 6 minutes. So, and we were done. In fact, we repurposed that meeting to something that came out of tier 3 that needed attention. And by 11 o'clock, everybody was done with those meetings. And we were off to the execution phase. So it's rapid cycle, but it's not cool and sexy. And there's no whiz bang solution. There's not a ton of PowerPoint slides. There's a set of huddle boards that all feed from one day to the next. And so if we need to know what happened in home health on March 2nd of 2022, we know. But it's usually resolved by noon on March 2nd, 2022. It doesn't carry forward, and 2 weeks later we meet about it.
Cooper, thanks for that. And, there's another sort of seeming paradox I want to explore a little bit. And that is that this does build over time. You've talked about it's not the 1995 and you're done in 3 months. On the other hand, once you get it rolling, you can make things, enduring solutions, happen quite quickly. And you have a lot of examples of the sort of ability to do these structured sprints, building on the day-to-day, solving things at the level they should be solved and picked up, to actually accomplish things at a much more enduring and fast rate than sort of more conventional approaches. So I don't know if there's anything you want to share with the group along those lines.
If the structure's there, the first few times we did it, it's kind of like the first times we did huddle. It was awkward. It was clunky. We got more wrong than we got right. When you got through one, you felt like you ought to celebrate because you finally made it through one correctly. And then you realize over time, this is actually very simple. It's very predictable, but it becomes, well, it's in line with the name of the podcast. It becomes habitually excellent. It gets through repetition. The same was true when we started doing sprints. We worked with Mike on that. And first time we started running sprints in 14-day cycles, and you can run them in other ones. We have run them in other ones, but that does seem to be kind of a workable cadence for us. It was clunky and it was awkward, and the process of making sure we were on task was clunky and awkward. And We weren't quite sure who to assign to make sure we were being self-accountable. I'll give you an example. We not long ago rolled out a new EMR, and we had some substantial challenges with that EMR. And it's not a terrible product, but we had problems with the implementation. And so what we found is we had key problems that came out of it, and we prioritized them all. We prioritized them all, starting with safety was the very first one. It's not like we use a different decision tree every time we have a different problem. Part of what allows us to be faster is we know what our decision tree is going to be, and we hang the problem on this existing model. We don't have to discover a new way to handle it. We knew what our priorities were going to be, and we knew what a model we would use, which is a 14-day sprint. And we were able to get more done in the first 3 weeks of that than we had done in the previous 9 weeks, flailing and frustrating people and sending them home. And I was laughing with you earlier. Nobody went straight home. They all wanted to go to the ABC store first, and not quite. Some of them made it home safely, but we made sure that we followed this 14-day sprint, and we were able to move through this quickly. And we're still in some of those sprints, by the way. They're not all resolved. But sprint 1 becomes sprint 2. And there's an accountability for getting it done. And then we meet to say, where's our progress? But we kind of have the same solution to every one of these, not the same solution. We have the same process for solving them when we run into issues, whether it's something as big as an EMR implementation, or if it's something as simple as elevated issues of social disruption near our inpatient facility. What's the first thing we're going to focus on? Safety, containment of harm, those sorts of things. And we moved quickly.
It's that capability build that allows you to be agile and innovative and effective problem solvers. And, you, like other leaders on the podcast who listen or have appeared, sort of recognize that in a fast changing world, it's sort of one of the most essential capabilities leaders can create, right? And the way to do it. So.
Actually, when we recognize that when we're slow, we are perpetuating harm. If we think about it, it's not, well, what's the financial implication? Let's not worry about that at the moment. What is the harm implication for our people, for our staff?
Mm-hmm.
And then what does that translate into as far as our ability to execute the mission? That immediately justifies whatever it is we have to do to resolve it. Because if we get that right, we will stop the financial harm. The financial harm is a quantifiable consequence, but it's never the problem. It's just how we measure the problem sometimes, I think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And by the way, for listeners that don't know, the financial metrics that have been coming off this stuff are very, very impressive in terms of creating greater opportunity for the health system and Cooper's own division. So
we've had good results on that, and that we have an unusually modeled financial model for our home health program. I often laugh and say we're the pressure relief valve for the highest acuity hospital in the state. Not that they need other pressure relief valves besides us, but that's our job, is to decompress hospitals that Duke owns.
Yeah. So anyway, super impressive and great to explore all that, including what seems to be slower, but in fact creates the possibility for faster and faster success and more sustained and more rapid and more agile. So Cooper, let's go back now for this section of the podcast and talk a little bit more about this paradigm error of what gets in our way as leaders, and we all do it, of choosing this enduring build approach versus the seemingly quick plug and play. You've done a lot of thinking about it. You use the metaphor of the gym. Talk to us more about what's in your mind in that. And we want our listeners really thinking about that and helping us think through, because I think if we can make a contribution here, we can do a lot of good.
So let me give a disclaimer. I'm not anti-technology. In fact, what I think we're using AI to transcribe this podcast.
Right. Absolutely.
We embrace technology, but it becomes a tool. It's not a solution. There seems to be this fascination with whether it's a consultant or a new bot, or it is a new software package that's going to accelerate your revenue cycle, or if you farm out your stuff to me, I'll make sure that you don't have any clinical outcome issues associated with your coding. There's a solution. Everybody's got a solution to plug in, and some of those are valuable. I'm not going to suggest we don't outsource stuff, but we seem to want really fast solutions that are externally generated. So we have a problem, whether it's, we're seeing challenges in our financial outcomes, or we're seeing issues in our clinical outcomes, or our staff are leaving, or we've got compliance challenge, pick something. And there's always this desire to have, it seems to be a pervasive desire to have an external group or gadget in some form come in and get plugged in, and that's our solution. I'll pick for home health. Several years ago, the first solution that was thrown out is we need a new EMR that'll stop our turnover. Our turnover went down with the exact same EMR. We needed to change the workflows. Now, we have since changed EMRs, but not because of turnover, but because there was an evolution in the needs of the organization. We don't need to have an external solution that comes in, and I've laughingly said to you, it's plug and we call it plug and play. Well, it doesn't plug in very neatly, and it doesn't play very well, most of this, and we struggle with it, and we continue to fall prey to it. To go to a national conference, and there will be an entire exhibit hall full of people with booths ready to sell you a solution to fit for your organization. And some of them may be helpful, but they will never fix the internal problem.
So some of it is the sort of sales pressure, right? That's out there everywhere. But what else? What else contributes to it? What is it in the life cycle of organizations that sort of sets us up for grabbing for, something to plug in versus
I think it's a couple of things. One, it's speed of response. So if somebody else can come in and we can do it. There are other, and I'm going to say this, and I don't know that a lot of leaders are going to love it. It removes the need for some courage. If we hire an outside company and this doesn't work, we can blame that outside company. If we say that our fundamental problem is one of internal performance, and we need to reflect on how we function as a leadership team to support our staff and our mission, and it becomes a high level of ownership, we get to own the successes, but we also have to own the failures. We have to own when we underperform. We have to own when we drop the ball. And by always bringing somebody else in, it gives us some professional, maybe psychic insulation from really owning these problems. But I think it also erodes the trust of our people, because they see us doing it. And I think people see through the veil. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't embrace AI or that you shouldn't outsource your insurance verifications, whatever it is. I'm not trying to make the point that there's no value in looking at ways to be more efficient and bringing in outside partners, but it can't become a surrogate or a replacement for us owning our issues and solving our problems and addressing our processes. And if we've addressed those processes and we realize there's a gap, then fill that gap. And it could be an outside party that does it. But we got to do the homework inside first, and not just looking for the new shiny gizmo to come fix it for us.
Yeah. Cooper, one of the things you've said to me is you've reminded me that in normal times when things are going along okay, change is hard and it's hard to get the gumption up to do it. And then we react differently when we're under pressure. So tell me a little bit about the role pressure plays in these kinds of decisions, and sort of
you're using the word pressure, and and not to offend anybody who's listening, but I think one of the biggest problems we have is the F word, the 4-letter F word at work, and we get is fear. And we don't want to call it fear, we call it pressure, or we call it organizational stress or whatever, but individually, we have a fear that we're going to fail. or we have a fear that we're not going to perform fast enough, or we have a fear of pick one. Everybody's got their own lens through which they process their anxiety, right? How do we back up from that some and try and reframe it in a sense of objectivity and say, I'm going to take ownership of that fear? And actually, by bringing it internal, we confront that more authentically than externally trying to solve it. And if you get for one person to do it as a leader is probably not going to work, in my opinion. It has to become the organizational culture for us to sit down as a group and remove the fear so that as a group, we can hold each other accountable. All right. Or the other way around. I sat with a leader yesterday who was beating themselves up for something they hadn't done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think you got to liberate yourself from this. You didn't drop the ball. You didn't get the outcome you wanted, but you didn't fail anybody. And there's a difference. Either extreme can be unhealthy. But I do think we've got to internalize it and get away from the fear of things. And part of that is, what's the organizational culture that each one of us works in?
Yeah.
Is it the old GE mentality where 10%'s got to go every year? What does that do ultimately?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's very powerful to hear you talk about that. And I think of all the times we hear folks at the director level, at the vice president level, voicing exactly what you said. Don't the leaders realize that bringing in XY firm to do this study and, share X with the board is it's stuff we've actually already looked at and have better data than they think they do, et cetera. And, when can we sit down together to solve the real challenges that we have, in a more connected manner? And so to hear that you recognize that phenomenon is great. And then to help us think about where it comes from, that leaders have fear too. In fact, that's what generates a lot of the energy in a lot of organizations a lot of the time. And to help us think about that compassionately so that we can help leaders catch ourselves collectively. As you said, it's about us individually, but it's also about collectively, and maybe start to experiment with a deeper path. We really appreciate hearing you start to move us in those directions.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think we all need to be just reflective. And I'll be honest, I don't want to work any place where I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, who else wants to? I mean, I've never heard anybody say, I'd like to work in a really fearful environment where I feel intimidated and devalued.
Right.
I've never heard anybody say that. And so if we think about it from that perspective, how does it change what we want to create for everybody that we're around? Our peer group. I mean, anyway, there was an easy answer, but I don't think any of this is easy. The work's hard, Ken.
Turns out. Right. But it is hard, but it's great too, right? Because it puts you in touch with people in a deeper way. It's easy to look at yourself in the mirror. Sometimes it's hard, and then a lot of times, but in the long term, you can feel pretty good about it. So,
well, you get a team that starts performing highly together and trusts each other enough to be vulnerable in a room together. And what you have is this engine that's becomes incredibly powerful and incredibly self-sustaining.
Well, it's great to hear about the engine you built and the sustainment it's getting, and that it's continuous, and that it's become agile and fast and producing great results across the board. Cooper, are there, and we really appreciate you appearing with us again today. What, are there any other thoughts you have for peers or for the field, home care and hospice, or healthcare more broadly, that you'd like to share at this stage before we sign off and ask our audience to pitch in with us?
No, actually, I think that is the thing. I think this should be an ongoing learning experiment for all of us. And if we took this learning experiment outside of one home-based care entity at one academic health system and were to replicate this across not just home-based care, but elsewhere. But home-based care, we can at least share some things that are common. What would happen? I mean,
Right.
what if we raise the bar for the whole industry as opposed to comparing ourselves to numbers in the industry that we know are bad and say, well, we're better than the bad. What if we collectively lifted that?
Yeah.
We could improve care for people at home literally across the country.
Awesome. Awesome. And that's always been your vision. And for those that don't know, Cooper is a very prominent voice and leader and example in that industry, which is such a, we haven't said it, but such an important part of healthcare and maybe undersung and but heroic. And those of us that have had the chance to touch it either professionally or in our own personal lives know it. So, we tip our hat to you as a leader, and we tip our hat to your entire team and workforce for what you do for all of us. For leaders who are listening, again, I think Cooper has given us a big gift of opening up this last part of the conversation to how we make these kind of decisions and how we can maybe train ourselves up collectively to do it differently, and beyond that, to share in a way that's very powerful and can change the industry, home care and hospice, and beyond. So we invite you to do that. Cooper is not a hard man to find on LinkedIn or otherwise, or via the Duke Home Health website. We have lots of resources, including previous appearances by Cooper and his team in different formats on our website at valuecapturellc.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Join the conversation, share your thoughts on this. We'd love to hear from you. And Cooper is sitting there waiting to help build the movement further in home health and hospice, as are we all. So, thank you for listening today. Give us a like on your favorite podcast platform. If you haven't subscribed already, do so. And most importantly of all, again, become part of the conversation. Cooper, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Habitual Excellence, presented by Value Capture. We hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, and please also rate and review it in your favorite podcast directory or app. To learn more about Value Capture and how we can help your organization on this journey to habitual excellence, visit our website at www.valuecapturellc.com.